Para los señores de la presidencia, ¿saben cuánto más se va a demorar?
Guy.
Hola, muy buenas.
Estás grabando ahorita.
Desde San José, Costa Rica.
Buen día.
Buenas tardes.
Buen día, señor.
Presidente, qué bueno que lo tenemos ya. Entonces, vamos a abrir el evento. Por ahora, por favor, todo el mundo en mute. Todavía no han entrado las participantes, solamente estamos aquí el equipo organizador. Qué bueno que ya estamos ahí. Se le ve bien, Enrique, se le escucha muy bien al presidente, así que...
Sí, señor presidente, si me puede dar unas palabras más, por favor, rápidamente.
Hola, Enrique, ¿cómo estás? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. ¿Me escuchas?
Bien. Perfecto, mucho gusto.
El gusto es mío.
Si les parece, podemos salir al aire ya.
Sí, abramos.
Hay una cuenta regresiva. Cuando lleguemos a 1, ya estaremos al aire, ¿ok?
Espero que tú quites la lámina para dar los mensajes de etiqueta y pasar la palabra a José Ramón.
Correcto, sí. En el momento que quite la lámina, ya es la señal para que inicien el evento. Entonces,
magnífico, gracias, Enrique.
Estaremos al aire en 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon. My name is Jose Ramon Gomez. I'm a representative from the Inter-American Development Bank in Costa Rica, and I'd like to give a special greeting to the President of the Republic, Carlos Alvarado, Mrs. Claudia Dobles, First Lady of Costa Rica, Mrs. Andrea Mesa, Minister of the Environment, Mrs. Veronica Zavala, Manager of the Central American countries, Haiti, Mexico, Panama, and the Dominican Republic of the IDB, Mr. Rodolfo Lacey, Director of the Environment of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and all of you who are in the virtual room this morning, and all of you who are following us through the different digital platforms. At this meeting, we're going to show the results of the study Costs and Benefits of the Decarbonizing of the Costa Rican Economy, carried out by the IDB with important findings for the Costa Rican economy, as well as for other countries of the region. This study quantifies and monetizes the actions of environmental sustainability and sustainable recovery through an analysis of those measures that have been applied by Costa Rica to achieve zero net emissions for 2050, while generating a substantial economic benefit for the country. Costa Rica has built constant leadership for decades in the area of the environmental protection and shows that green growth can continue with economic growth. What you'll see this afternoon harmonizes these two agendas, and with the environmental development, which can play a fundamental role in the economic reactivation after the pandemic. It's far from being a burden to the economy. Decarbonizing, well implemented, can contribute with net benefits now and throughout the next decades. I'm sure that the study we're launching today will have an international scope and importance, for it gathers knowledge of experts from the IDB, experts from Costa Rica, and international experts. And if the results may be of interest for other economies of the region who want to follow Costa Rica's steps. To officially open this presentation, it is an honor for me to give the floor to the President of the Republic, Mr. Carlos Alvarado Quesada. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Jose Ramon. And good afternoon to Andrea Mesa, our Minister of the Environment and Energy, Mr. Rodolfo Lacey, Director of the Environment at the OECD, dear Veronica Zavala, from the Central American countries, Haiti, Mexico, Panama, and Dominican Republic for the IDB, and all those of you who are connected to this meeting and are following our webinar. Today, we are here for something very exciting, which are the results of the IDB study on the costs and benefits of the decarbonization plan of the Costa Rican economy. In February of 2019, that's some time ago, Costa Rica launched its decarbonizing plan to achieve its goal in 2050 of being a completely decarbonized country. That to reduce and counteract the risks of the climate risks for this and next generations, as well as a way or mechanism to assist in human development, social development, economic, and to extend biodiversity and the motherland. All this, which inspires us, particularly the younger generations, often meets a great deal of skepticism from many voices that it's difficult to decarbonize, that it's not realistic, that it would make us lose jobs. And recently, they wonder how we can focus on something like decarbonizing when we think of 2050, when today we have such terrible challenges like COVID-19, just to mention one. In recent weeks in Central America, while we were not only tackling the pandemic, we had the impact of two hurricanes in the region, Iota and Eta. These hurricanes, which according to the scientifics have had the most extreme effects because of the climate change. In the last 40 years, we've lost close to half of the biomass and biodiversity of the planet, which sustains many of our ecosystems. And yes, it's true that we live in a context in which unemployment is terrible as a result of the pandemic. But we're living in a completely interconnected world. We cannot understand today's world if we don't see it based on what the climate change could mean for mankind, which is nothing more than an extreme situation where the life of our planet and the life of human beings will be deeply affected. And in a transformation of our economies towards not only more resilient, but more sustainable economies of new productive ways and new welfare, where phenomena like migration or the inequality between men and women is also affected by the climate. Many of these debates for the skeptics meet up with the barrier of, well, what are the benefits? What's the cost benefit of decarbonizing an economy like Costa Rica's, as suggested by the Decarbonization Plan? This study is answering that question. That's why it's so important. That's why it's so all-encompassing and so necessary. According to the data of the study between 2020 and 2050, just to give you one of the figures that is so impressive, the economic benefit of implementing this is close to $41 billion in net benefits for the country. $41 billion, which is an extraordinary figure. But it also leads to benefits in health, minimizing the effects of the air pollution, which is one of the main causes of hospitalizations in the country for children and older adults. And also with an improvement of public transportation, which would be clean and electric and passive, either an electric train, be it electric buses like those that we will be launching this Friday, Madam Minister. Not only will we improve the air and the quality of the air, but it will reduce the number of traffic accidents, which is one of the greatest causes of violent deaths in our country. And also, in this transformation of livestock, agriculture, and the improvement of our forests, we will find solutions with science and technology that will generate better jobs and better quality jobs with greater productivity and with added value, which is another benefit of the decarbonizing. The forests and our biodiversity, for example, represent one of the ways in which we can keep our economy from ecotourism. And while the world has undergone a radical reduction of biodiversity, today in Costa Rica, thanks to our parks and park protections and the payment for environmental services, we've recovered many of these species like the jaguar or the that these are animals that are high in the change of complexity, which are the first affected when there's problems in biodiversity. This detailed study would not have been possible had we not launched our decarbonizing plan with its 10 key pillars, which seeks to transform not just a government or an administration or one period, but a country with a 2050 mission. What are we thinking? Not for us. We're thinking of the future, our children, our grandchildren who will come. And I wish to say that in 2050, when I'm 70 years old, my son Gabriel will be my age now, and I hope he'll be able to appreciate that decarbonization and to enjoy it in a happy world. I want to thank you because this would not have been possible. The IDB, thank you very much to the IDB for being our strategic partner, who not only offered the technical expertise, but their credibility for this study to become a reality. And under the careful review of skeptic routine experts, it's been subjected to that acid test because that's what we want. We want it to go under the mirror. And Abraham, thank you very much for the support you gave us to the RAND Corporation, because it was thanks to their expertise and the help of the experts in Costa Rica who also participated in the Costa Rican University, in the Climate Change Division, and the Ministry of Mine, Energy, and other public institutions. This launching is something we expected from the minute we launched the decarbonizing program itself. And today we have that tool, and we can tell the world, not only with our knowledge of this, but with the numbers in our hands, this is the right road to follow. So all of you who've made this possible, thank you so much. And we're awaiting to hear more of the details of this study, which you'll be sharing with us today, of the costs and benefits of the decarbonizing economy of Costa Rica. Thank you very much to each and every one of you. Thank you, Jose Ramon, for your support. Veronica, all of you at the IDB. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for those words. Truly, your words show the importance of the decarbonizing for the economic development of the country. Here at the IDB, we are willing to continue to help the government with the economic reactivation and the objective of achieving zero net emissions. To chair the next panel, it's an honor to offer the floor to Veronica Zavala, who is our manager of the Central American Countries Department. Veronica, thank you and good afternoon. Veronica? You're mute, Veronica, you're muted. I'm sorry. I believe your mute will be the sentence of the week, of the year, I should say. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your words. Thank you very much, Jose Ramon, Madam Minister. Thank you for being with us here. And thank you, Roberto Lassi, who's here from OECD for the launching of this study. I want to welcome the panelists who will be with us this afternoon. As the President said quite rightly, this has been a very different world for us. And on this, before I get into the subject matter, I wanted to mention that we are can easily understand the consequences, the economic and health effects of COVID-19 in our region. The pandemic could maybe turn us back 15 years as far as the levels of poverty by the end of this year. And we cannot lose sight of the fact that we've had a climate and environmental crisis as well. Several countries of Central America were devastated by the hurricanes Eta and Iota, as the President mentioned, that battered particularly Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, but Costa Rica as well. Aside from this, just a couple of months ago, we heard the news from WWF, as we know it, reported that the region had lost 90% of its population of some of the species who were in danger of extinction. That's why it's more and more important to hear this calling for a sustainable recovery. More so, I insist, after COVID-19. In fact, If the region were to bet on environmental sustainability, we would be able to create 15 million net jobs, according to a study published jointly with the International Labor Organization last July. The opportunities are extensive in sectors like agriculture, based on plants, forest, energy. Today, we're launching this new study which evaluates the costs and benefits of decarbonization in Costa Rica, thanks to the support of the French Climate Fund. This study was done with experts from the University of Costa Rica and RAND, a U.S. think tank that works evaluating public policies. We also worked with the Climate Change Division of the Ministry of the Environment and Energy, and through them, with more than 50 other agencies from the government and representative organizations of those sectors that play such an important role in the National Decarbonizing Plan, giving us valuable input to guarantee the relevance and precision of this study. To discuss its results, we have Andrea Mesa, Minister of the Environment and Energy in Costa Rica, as well as Rodolfo Lacey, Director for the Environment of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. My first question is for the Minister. Minister Mesa, talk to us about the decarbonization and tell us why it's relevant for Costa Rica during this pandemic. Good afternoon, and thank you very much. First, a special greeting to Don Carlos Alvarado, our President. Doña Verónica, thank you so much for your first words and for this framing of this. My dear friend Rodolfo Lassi from the OECD, Director of the Environment, and from Jose Ramon Gomez, representative of the B in Costa Rica, and all of you who are here with us today in this launching and the presentation of this study, which has, in fact, an incredible strength. It's the decarbonizing and how we see it. I think that the first key issue is to understand that we're talking about a development model focusing on the welfare of people, as well as allowing a modernization of the economy, making it more dynamic, but within what we call the geophysical limits of the planet, under a vision of advancing in becoming net zero emissions by 2050 and achieve the goals we have set for ourselves. This process, this vision of the decarbonization is closely related to understanding that we wish to improve the quality of life of the Costa Ricans and the cities and the efficiency of rural territories, ensuring that we have total independence from fossil fuels. We're a country that does not produce fossil fuels, and that would be a radical change in this energy dependence. But we take advantage of many of those resources we do have, these wonderful resources like the sun, the wind, the water, and thus produce energy. And we have a series of technological options based on human talent and the Costa Rican human resource, which lets us advance generating welfare and care for the ecosystems, which are so important. We recognize also that the nature-based solutions are fundamental for this improvement of welfare and wealth solutions, and that they not be an obstacle to development, as is often thought. I really believe that, as others have said, the President and Veronica, what we're living in the Central American territory is clear evidence of what is going to continue to happen if we don't change our consumption and production patterns, if we're not able to decarbonize globally. Fortunately, politically speaking, we've had excellent announcements. We began with those announcements from the European Union and Asia and China and Korea, committing to the net zero emissions. And yesterday, with the appointment of John Kerry as the representative in that process in the United States, we're sure to have, I believe, an accelerated transformation of these economies to generate inclusion, welfare, and advance in that road towards net zero emissions. That's how we see the decarbonization. It's not just to achieve Paris's objectives, it's a key model for development. Thank you, Minister. And first of all, I want to congratulate you for your leadership in all these agendas. It's through you, the government of Costa Rica and Costa Rica as a whole. This is an agenda which the multilateral agencies are celebrating. And I think all of us in the world of development recognize the case of Costa Rica almost as a decarbonization laboratory. And that's why it's such a pleasure for us to be able to work with you. My colleagues in the climate change division always say that the experience in Costa Rica is an inspiration to continue to support them. And even though the countries are not at that same level, may at least consider the possibilities of some type of leadership and enormous advances in this field. But before we close on this, I'd like to ask you, what are the results that you feel are the most outstanding and that encourage all of us? I don't want to say it. I want you to tell us. What do you think is the most important? Thank you very much, Veronica. I believe that I'd like to share some of the results, but if I may, I'm going to show a brief presentation with some of the data from the report. And just briefly tell you, and this is an anecdote that we always bring up. One of the first things, I was director of climate change at the time, and the minister was Minister Rodriguez. I recall a meeting when the president called us in and said, I want the decarbonization plan in 6 months, and that's it. And it was like getting us all to work in panic and run out and find ways to get the support of the IDB, experts internationally and nationally, so that we could advance with that plan, which has been included in our National Development Plan, where we've really taken key elements from everywhere to add it to our planning system and now advance with key investments. And it's been the foundation of many of the aspects that we're seeing and identifying as positive. I'd like to make sure that you see the presentation. It's on the screen. As I was saying, this study counted on the support of experts globally, the experts from the bank, experts from the RAND Corporation, from the United States, who assesses public policies, and with experts from here, the knowledge from the university, the Power Laboratory in Costa Rica, the support of many experts, I would say more than 50 institutions in the country offered data, the central bank, the transportation ministry, agricultural ministry. It's really been something that has let us truly understand and analyze the impact of all these policies. And what was the first element, medular element, I would say? Well, we saw that this vision, this development model offers net benefits of more than $41 billion from 2020 to 2050. And here I'd like to emphasize that often we hear the argument of decarbonization for the big countries, for the developed countries. But what we find actually is that this implementation shows us the road towards development, and it is very cost effective to allow us to achieve welfare in our countries when we're trying to make decisions and trying to choose what's the right road to follow. Well, we reviewed the decarbonization plan, and we have 10 large axes or pillars associated, some to rural territory, urban territory, some linked to industry, construction, the circular economies. And once we began to truly analyze the investments required, we started to quantify the economic benefits. And it's there that we began to see, and this is a very clear chart showing us what we have. In the lines below, we see the investment cost included in some cases with analysis or cost estimates, as we'll see in the rural part. And we started to quantify the benefits, the net benefits, which are different when we speak, for example, of the rural territories, where we see that implementation of agriculture, for example, the precision agriculture, where we have a series of agricultural performance in agro, livestock, silviculture sector. But when we started quantifying the different ecosystemic service of the forest, for example, or when we see the improvements of the agricultural performance,
that's where we see a net benefit in terms of investments. In the case of rural areas, the benefits are basically around 22 billion. So when we start discussing the changes or improvements that we need to undertake in urban centers, in other words, a commitment that we have in the government to change these paradigms, to make cities that are more compact, that are more public transportation friendly, where once again, we see the benefits that are derived, that are taken from improving air quality, reduce the amount of traffic accidents. And we also see how in some cases, within the midst of this pandemic and the emergency, in some areas where we have a better air quality, we are seeing an improvement in the behavior patterns, especially in terms of healthcare indicators. So I think there's a very clearly defined relationship between the quality of life, healthcare, as well as the urban settings and improvement in standards of living. So we're seeing some key structural issues, including moving forward with modernizing our electric grid. And I think the study reinforces that with several uncertainties as well. These experts, with the understanding that there are many uncertainties relating to specific types of technology, we begin to see that in this case, in more than 3,000 scenarios that we evaluated, only in 21 of those cases did we see data that perhaps introduced some a little higher net costs outweighing the investments. But again, we can say with robust data, this is the correct path that it's pointing to. It's also leading to some interesting investments in based on various studies that we've conducted in specific sectors, in the agricultural sector, in the transportation sector, the agro-industrial sectors, that will also be key in creating new jobs and restarting the economy. So you can consult the IDB website and also the climate change site. There is a summarized version that's already available. We've already uploaded it, and we're here to answer any questions that you may have. And I leave you with that, Veronica. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. It's always a pleasure to hear you. And I think that's an excellent laboratory. And again, we're appreciative of that. So now I would like to discuss, have Rodolfo Las with us, who is the director of OECD. And thank you very much, Rodolfo. I know that previously you were in Mexico when you were director of Semarnat, and I know that Mexico played a significant role in all the efforts that were undertaken in the context of the Paris Summit 2015, and among all the environmental issues and working with the ministries of finance. We know that we were closely following what you were doing, but now we'd like to look at everything that you've seen today, the findings. What do you think of the experience of Costa Rica? And how can other countries of the OECD, I'm sure they have had similar experiences. Maybe we can share that. Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate the president of Costa Rica. I think he has shown a great leadership, and it's not just how we define long-term objectives in terms of climate change, but we also see here how efforts are made now to undertake a significant decarbonization effort. I'd also like to congratulate Minister Andrea Mesa, and we are very pleased at OECD to see that they are now implementing many of the actions that are closely followed by OECD countries. And we see this is a country that's now in the vanguard in this process. But with the example, we know that many countries have sound policies that are about to be implemented at OECD. But Costa Rica has already started implementing this. They have a wealth of experience to share, not just in developing economies like Mexico and Chile, but also industrialized countries as well. So I'd like to convey greetings to all my colleagues and friends from the IDB. And I believe that this activity that you are undertaking, where you are coordinating efforts and you are aligning this with all of the goals, I think is very noteworthy. But getting back to the question, how do I view the Costa Rican experience and comparing it to member states of the OECD's experiences? Well, it's a very open country that has a public policies very similar to those environmental policies, similar to those of the OECD countries. And they've also had significant achievements in specific activities that I think will lay the groundwork for and establishing patterns for resilience and low carbonization. And because it is such an open economy, and because you also have specific challenges. You have challenges in the transportation sector. You also have challenges in the export arena. And you're still you're still using vehicles that require fossil fuel. So we see that, we see it reflected in the pollution levels, and of course the measures that persist, those high levels that persist, means that you still have a long way to go. But if we look at it in comparison to other countries, we know that you have developed, if we look at the electrical energy sector, compared to the OECD countries, you have made a great deal of progress. And there are some basic environmental infrastructures that have been improving in Costa Rica, but I think contrary to other countries of the OECD, you're faced with some very serious environmental challenges, and I know that urban development has not been as closely planned and as linear as what you see in other countries. And I think that is reflected in what we've been discussing. I don't want to go on too long, but I just wanted to mention that the carbon footprint in Costa Rica is very low compared to other countries and with the OECD. And I think that's attributed to the fact that your agricultural sector is now focused more on environmentally sustainable exports and products. And I know that in Paris here, I buy pineapples from Costa Rica. In fact, I have one right here. I don't want to do some advertising, but this is something that is renowned internationally speaking. And I think that also creates a greater trust in the market when other countries whose trading partners are involved in the implementation of public policies like the OECD countries are saying, well, we are going to support zero emission economies by 2050. And Costa Rica is also now showing these examples and following along the same policy lines. Then this creates greater trust. And we know the products are more pricey, but that also generates more wealth. And these are some of the benefits that I've seen reflected in the study. For those of us who are devoted to looking at countries' performance track record, I think it's very clear that this is the right path to go down for Costa Rica. And it's also the right path for Central America overall. And also, I think it'll serve the interests of Latin America in general, because we need to move forward by example.
Creo que
I
estás
think you're on mute.
Ok, muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask, looking at the steps forward, when we look at this, we're hearing a lot about the consequences of COVID-19 and that the recovery has to expand sustainable development initiatives. And I think that gets back to the advantage you talked about. So to what extent do climate strategies can also translate into broader development goals? And in response to COVID-19 and other challenges, especially in a more sustainable way? Well, we are supporting the idea of a green recovery, which is a term that is closely tied with green and sustainable growth based on what the minister already talked about, that circular economy. It's very easy to say it, but it's very difficult to follow through and implement it. A circular economy, and for many years has promoted this principle of the expanded responsibility taken on by industries. And it's the responsibility of all these sectors. They have to support the producers and industries that can benefit, providing goods and services to benefit the population. But that circular approach will only be successfully implemented when all assume their environmental responsibilities. And I think this is going to have a spillover effect in the measures and the policies when we're looking at, for example, environmental taxes overall need to help to shape this circular economy. And in the green recovery, well, that's what we're proposing, is to lower taxes that are associated to such things as ecotourism and the producing organic foods and other products, and raise taxes, increase taxes on those industries that use fossil fuels, because they're basing their goods and services on the use of fossil fuels. So we measure this through what we call the effective carbon rate, which is a measure of the effectiveness of policies. And I get back to the Costa Rican example. They've undergone fiscal reforms that are in the process of being implemented, and they have environmental factors that will help speed up the pace of recovery. It's a progressive process, and that's our recommendation, that you need to align these economic instruments in order to achieve green recoveries, and the green recovery become even greener as well as bluer when we're talking about also protecting the biodiversity of the oceans. We need to focus on the renewal of many of these businesses with new technologies, green technologies. And if you can, we can address this in a little more detail. But getting back to the recovery process, we are also thinking that it's important to support those industries that during the recovery phases that sometimes it's difficult to support these polluting industries, but they support, we have to invest the money in businesses that have a future. And that is where we need to reiterate and redouble our efforts to try to provide options to the workers so that they can transition to new industries from the old. And this is the time, it's a critical transition period. we know that since 2008, with the financial crisis, we've seen crises, opportunities, and we're seeing it again. We're seeing opportunities that we need to seize. And based on some of the things I've heard, I think we are going down the right path. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rodolfo. Well, we have a lot of questions. Now, this question, I think, is for Andrea. We always talk about this in the IDB. We have a lot of demand for supporting these subject designs. What about those countries that want to follow the same journey, the same path that you have undergone? Thank you, Veronica. A very interesting question. And first of all, this is a development model, and the long-term planning strategies are essential. We need to understand that having these strategies, long-term strategies in place, are going to be vital. Many of these major changes require policies of state. You can't have policies that have to change with each administration. So you have that long-term planning strategy in addition with regards to the Paris Accord that also call for long-term planning. At the national level, we need to, again, draw those paths, long-term paths, as Rodolfo talked about, for example, making meaningful change in the transportation sector. So we have a commitment to introduce those major changes in transportation, but that's not going to be undertaken from one administration and change with another administration. We need to have adequate investments that are closely aligned with these changes and also create more confidence in the market so that we see the kind of foreign direct investment that we need. Where are we positioning ourselves? And Costa Rica is a small country with an open economy. We have, for example, the gourmet low emission coffee that we grow. So we've created niche markets and they're more competitive. And at the same time, we are going to create the proper conditions conducive for this transformational change. And I think one of the key elements is to have those plans established, to understand that these are tied to developmental models that include the Ministry of Planning, the various sectoral ministries, Ministry of the Treasury. They all have to be on board. And secondly, the other climate tools that have to be also updated. We have a very clear perspective and we are continuously updating it. How do we achieve greater inclusion in sectoral and social inclusions in the changes that are required for decarbonization to be fully successful? We're seeing some interesting events taking place. So I think it's good news. And we have seen this with the banks. We had a loan that was based on the public policies that was significant, and also conditional funds that have excellent conditions, by the way, the climate fund, results-based performance. And we're also holding many events, significant events, and even training. And it's been very, very meaningful. Well, it's interesting when you start to align this, it also becomes a smart way of increasing profits and increasing resources. So now with Rodolfo, we're talking about a lot of the transition phase into zero emission economies and looking at resilience and protecting biodiversity. What lessons can we draw for other examples and scenarios? Well, I think what's more important to note is that this data and the responsibility that you addressed about the loss of biodiversity in the region, we cannot allow that our species continue to go or become extinct, and that they're extinct because of global warming or because we're seeing emissions of toxic emissions affecting our water, the quality of our water, our soil, and because we're killing insects, we're killing all types of species, flora and fauna in Costa Rica, and we know that some of the insects and flora and fauna are, and that biodiversity requires sound environmental policies. We need to also create that connectivity between the ecosystems. How do we achieve? How can we ensure clean water and air in those protected areas? And in those agricultural areas, there's areas that are devoted to forestry and livestock. How can we ensure that those areas are also clean? And that's really an undertaking, a business that needs to, again, be tied to economic goals and objectives. Who's willing to pay these costs? Well, there's a lot of funds, and there are new mechanisms that are going to be implemented over the next 10 years in this decade after the Paris Accords signing. And in the last report by the OECD about how climate change and how hundreds of millions of dollars are being invested in Latin American and developing economies. It's Latin America only gets 17% of these resources. There are very few projects that have those two variants that helps to reduce emissions and at the same time protects biodiversity. So the solutions based on supporting nature-based, are looking at that duality of achieving that greater biodiversity and at the same time reducing the emissions. So I think this is a major challenge that can be taken on by Costa Rica and Central America. Let me just share my dreams with you right now. But now that Costa Rica has developed so much of this, why not export their successes? Many other countries are doing it. It's very easy to achieve that electrical connectivity, but it's even better to connect businesses in terms of sharing know-how, entrepreneurial skills, local skills. All of that can be disseminated from Costa Rica, in addition to the products that are now being marketed internationally. The chocolates, the delicious chocolates being exported, macadamia nuts, exotic fruits, all being exported from Costa Rica. So this, I think, is the basis of a global economy. And this has benefited greatly many of the developing economies. In other words, high quality products where you also have environmental justice behind it, environmentally friendly, and the producers are paid well for manufacturing these goods and products. But you need to promote this and through new mechanisms, which includes climate funding, but also you need to have these new global funds that are for financial products, and we need to maximize, leverage this so that we can undertake meaningful green initiatives that support nature-based. And we're starting to see these pipelines with the industrial sectors associated to new markets and carbon emission markets that will be tied to the aeronautical industry, for example. I should also talk about tourism, sustainable ecotourism. We have seen for many years beaches that have been, and tourist destinations that have been certified. And this doesn't just build greater trust, but also now in the midst of some of these challenges, people want to travel to these eco-friendly areas but they want to fly there in an aircraft that doesn't emit huge quantities of CO2 emissions. So I don't want to increase my carbon footprint when I'm traveling. So maybe I won't go. No, you can go because we have that balance based on the Paris Accords. And we can show that this has been certified and we have all of those measures in place. So we need to reactivate ecotourism with these new products. I'm fully convinced that Costa Rica can really be in the forefront of all of that. Thank you very much. So we have some questions. One for Andrea. The decarbonization brings net benefits, but we know it's not easy. So what are some of the key challenges with a low carbon economy? What about domestic policies and what sectors might lose out? When looking at maybe the economy overall will come out ahead, but what about those that are left behind? That's basically the question. Well, thank you very much. And no, it's not an easy undertaking without any doubt. And we are faced with a very complex scenario, because what we're seeing now are solutions that are based once again on extraction. This is what we see. And so people are looking for quick solutions in order to create jobs, etc. But we are realizing that that's not the entire picture. So right now, in the midst of this economic crisis, that is one of the key challenges. We have a lot of, we're still pressured by that extraction-based vision. And in Costa Rica, where people are still talking about exploration of oil fields and resources. So what are some of the key challenges? Well, it's clear that the transition from one economy where fossil fuels are omnipresent, not just in the transportation sector, but they're in our industries, in plastics manufacturing. It's found everywhere. And so if we say that we are going to transition and create that economic well-being for many people, and it's unimaginable for many, it's an element that is cultural as well, significant cultural factor. And for a developing economy with a very small fiscal set of resources, we have to be careful about prioritizing. And we have to make sure that this will generate jobs. It'll at the same time energize the economy, and it's closely aligned to our vision. How can we mobilize these resources? And I think it gets back to what Rodolfo said. Ultimately, we have investment funds that are there to support the efforts, but how can we make sure that the cooperation funds, the multilateral funds, serve as catalysts in order to attract more investment and help mobilize the private sector resources as well? And we need to have those enabling environments where we have the fiscal support and stimulus as well. And sometimes these are challenges, and because of our traditional structural model. And thirdly, I think it's right now the most complex element is really the polarization that we are seeing. And it's not just something we see in Costa Rica, it's worldwide. And that polarization, I think, makes the scenario even more complex. And sometimes it hinders our having meaningful discussions. And also in terms of even when we bring in robust data like we have now. So this also generates a lot of complexity in the context of governance. So in the structural arena, we are very dependent on fossil fuels for many things. And we also have we have the issue of accessing significant funds. And again, we have very scarce room, fiscally speaking, and we also have the polarization that I mentioned earlier. These are issues. And once again, in the face of a scenario where we have so much resistance you can be sure that we are constantly making political decisions, and the system responds. And we see that present here. Decision was made to abolish the armed forces, and that faced a lot of challenges. A decision was made to change the legislation, and also there was legislation about changes in the use of soil, and also we had to create clear ground rules, and this generated several projects. And now we are making a commitment to see how can we consolidate that blue and green economy, the orange economy of innovation. All of these are combined, and to understand that that consistency of public policies, sectoral, national policies, is vital in that transformation process in the long and medium term.
In order to generate a series of activations, because many of these investments are to generate jobs. And just the last element, Veronica, the importance of even bringing the social systems to the table. The social protection systems are also vital. They must have the consistency and the coherence so that we can, right, especially in this time of crisis, to give conditioned support to many of those activities of the blue economy that we were talking about. And there's interesting experiences also that we could talk about. Yes, in fact, that's the next question for both of you, maybe beginning with Rodolfo. How do we include in these agendas the private sector? Because of course, the leadership of the public sector is indispensable to find the north. But if the private sector can't participate, there's a delay that will be there, as the minister suggested. How do we attract the private sector? I'll start with Rodolfo. It's a question for both of you. Well, we did touch on the economic instruments and how we allow the financial system to get involved so that it can quickly channel the private sector with credits and funds. But there's also the regulation. And let me give you an example again, because I think that it's one of the great challenges in Costa Rica, transportation. The private cars and the vans, the electric vans, are all very expensive. There are countries like the European countries that no longer sell. In countries like France, for example, they don't sell cars that are not hybrids or electric. That's all you see in the announcements. That's all you hear. So we have to regulate certain types of transportation that are more accessible for the population and that can turn the corner. They can cause a radical change. I saw it in China. I went to an event in China in this new paradigm of the Ecologic Society and the Ecologic Association, and all the motorcycles are electric because they had a serious problem of pollution in China and Peking. And you have to change that, your fleet. That's one of the objectives of your decarbonizing plan of the motorcycles, which is probably the cheapest and most accessible transportation for the people. And there are cheap options for the electrical motorcycles. So create that market, create that niche, make the decision of saying, okay, from now on, only electrical bicycles, and there's no other kinds. The electrical motorcycle market is growing at an incredible speed. Why can't Costa Rica be part of that world? There are bicycles that you can rent here, right here in the street where I live. I can rent a bicycle, an electrical bicycle, right across the street from me. So that will help transportation in a geography as difficult as Costa Rica's. And also there's the public transportation, which would be ideal. It's wonderful news that you're going to be inaugurating the electrical buses this Thursday. I mean, it's great, but there are also electrical vans, and you have to open the market with concrete stimuli. Comparing Europe with Costa Rica, well, Europe has said, I'm going to invest 2 million in the next years for economic recovery of the electrical charging stations. So that means that the vehicles appear and they can charge publicly. If the electrical matrix of Costa Rica is clean, well, then there's dual profit. It's win-win. Less emissions, cleaner city, less exposure to highly toxic pollutions, and they come from the e-motorcycles and vehicles. And then we have a new business, the private sector in transportation. And I gave that example, but I have others, but I don't think we'll have time to give them all. But in ecotourism, there's tons of examples like this. Andrea, how do you see it? After these interesting initiatives of Rodolfo, how do you see the private sector in here? Well, I can tell you that the private sector is already participating. We have not only carbon neutral, where the companies voluntarily measure their carbon footprint in their product or productive process, and they identify the sources, they establish reduction measures or compensation measures, and as they buy those Costa Rican compensation units, the OCCs, they invest money that we can reinvest in the payment scheme for environmental reduction. So we already have, in our case, at least more than 200 organizations that are part of the country program, Programa País, more than 20 municipalities that are also measuring their carbon footprint. And those are voluntary. But interestingly, it's understanding, and we saw this with the coffee sector, that we're talking about efficiency. And we find technological packages where for the farm or for the benefiting the sources, we're able to improve the efficiency at the farm of the productive system and at the same time reduce the emissions. So it's also a win-win situation. And in the end, that coffee, as we were saying, in the beneficiary stage, what are the technologies that allow them to reduce costs? And they were able to talk to the entrepreneurs of the Programa País as well as of the regimens that we have advancing in the decarbonization of certain subsectors like the coffee, the cattle raising. And we're working with other products now like banana, the industrial or green construction system. We see often that if there's a need for a bigger investment at the beginning, the technology may be a little more expensive, but in the end, when we see the total life cycle, it turns out to be an important savings because in general, many of these technologies bring us to an optimization and improvement of efficiencies, and that reduces costs. So this element is vital for the private sector's involvement. And as we were saying before, one of the new business models, when we speak of that change of the city model of generating an electric train that's interconnected, that will allow us to develop the real estate in sustainable fashion, or maybe sustainable mobility, then we're also, once again, checking all this. We made a contest and we brought all sorts of innovators to bring in new solutions and technological ideas. And they were all new enterprises, people with really interesting ideas for services related to electrical mobility. And just to give you an example of the innovation that is so closely related to the decarbonizing process, the digitalization process, and the decentralization of electric production. These are all innovative systems. And in the end, as you were saying, Veronica, what are the subsectors that need to change? And that's where we're heading with these uh, focuses. We have to recognize that there are some sectors that actually need that transition, that need to begin to speak of the different options of changes and the gasoline supply, the hydrocarbons. And we've had conversations, we have to have them. We talked to the largest company we have, which is the public oil company. We're in conversations with them. We've had several discussions with them to see what the roles, what the changes, what the new niches are. But those changes or transitions have already taken place in many economies. And I believe that what's important of the public issue is to recognize that we need fair transition processes. And before I give you the floor for the final session, there's a question to clarify here. How can you detail the costs? Are these avoided costs or are they benefits associated to greater profitability in the different sectors? Well, we have important savings associated to efficiency, as I was mentioning. In many cases, what we have in the end, in that change of the city model and in the implementation of the public policies, what we're seeing is improvements in things like tourism. No, she corrects, not tourism. Air quality, which was what we were talking about, less accidents, because what we're betting on is that less people will go in those motorcycles that can be very polluting and very complex, or they can go in the private cars and that they walk more, that they live closer to where they work and use public transportation. And all that generates a series of benefits and savings in our accounts, because what's happened with the current model based on the private vehicle, whoever comes to San Jose will know that there's a nightmare in peak hours. You're in the car with hundreds of accidents and you spend hours where you're fully unproductive. You're sitting in a car doing nothing in these terrible traffic jams. All that has enormous costs for the economy. And when we begin to quantify that, we begin to quantify the benefits, and we imagine the city, for example, with less traffic jams, with people having more time to enjoy or produce, with less accidents and so forth, and better quality of the air, then there'll be less people sick going to the hospital. All these are part of the economic benefits. And much of the efficiency is achieved because the precision agriculture is important, and then the quantification of the ecosystemic systems, the availability of water, good productive soils, and so forth. Very good. Thank you very much. And to end, as I was saying, maybe Rodolfo would like to leave us with some ideas of how you would summarize this. What do you think is the most important thing here? Well, I think that it's very important for us to have a study to clearly show us the cost effectiveness and the enormous benefits of the decarbonizing of Costa Rica's economy. I think it's a unique study that will give us guidelines internationally on how to achieve these new sustainable development paradigms. But in transition, as the minister said, it has to be a fair transition. That's what the population expects, and that's probably where we have the challenge of the environmental management. And that's what's more relevant, because the economic recovery after the pandemic is what we're expecting now. The crisis is tremendous internationally, and it's not only in Costa Rica. It's a crisis where, fortunately, we're considering this green recovery, and this is where I believe Costa Rica will have an advantage over many, since they have already taken a series of steps of development of green policies, which now will be easier to implement to change the behavior of the society, the behavior of individuals following more sustainable practices. Nobody wants to be related, and I see that in my own children, and I'm sure you have the same experience. Nobody wants to be involved in dirty industries, industries that are damaging the planet. The young people want social jobs with social meaning, um, remunerated with the digitalization of their day-to-day activities. Fortunately, it goes hand in hand with technological clean means. So let's take advantage of that and let's mark the difference. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much, Rodolfo. Actually, that's quite true. The next generation has very different standards and they do motivate us. They're very in line with this agenda. Minister, some final thoughts? This is a subject that requires a tremendous development model, which helps us achieve that justice, the intergenerational justice that Rodolfo just spoke of. And I think that the new generations have it very clear. It's very encouraging when you sit down and talk to them and you hear their ideas and you see their visions. Many of the things of the collaborative economy, of sharing data, all of these things that sometimes many of us find it difficult to understand are things that they are doing already. And if used for the common good, can generate incredible profits and changes. The decarbonization process covers all sectors of the economy for it to be effective. And it's very important that it involves every sector of the economy. The decarbonization plan has included every single sector, and having the right roadmaps with technological elements, but not only a technological change, it is also a institutional change, how to respond to that bicentennial economy, as we call it, the economy of the future, with appropriate coherent fiscal frameworks to achieve educational processes, because it's a new citizen and it's a new city, it's a new rural sector, it's a new coastal sector. And above all, clearly indicating that we're all in this together and that it is an agenda for development built with that public harmonization regionally, locally, with all sectors of civil society. Everyone can contribute to it and are actually contributing to it. So though it may seem impossible, too big, we're ready. We see signs of clear policies worldwide that will help us accelerate the change. And it's just a question of all of us starting to adopt it and implement it at our own little spaces. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you very much. And I think that what the minister has said is really true. The future is here, not only digitally, but in transformation, a green economy. It's here to stay, and that's where we're heading. So we have to see how we do that transition in the best possible way. And as you said, to do it with justice so that the costs are distributed appropriately. But it's very positive and it gives us a lot of hope to see that there's so many positive things to take that road. What you can export, knowledge-wise, product-wise, all of these niche markets which are going to be better remunerated in the future by the upcoming generation who values it. So thank you all very much for this. And I want to take advantage of this last minute to tell you that from the IDB, we've been working with the fair transitions. We have a publication with the ILO of employment in net zero emissions future. We published it in July. And together with this study will help us have the necessary elements for this conversation to continue to be richer and to offer benefits for other countries as well, so that they can all feel that they can possibly start on this road that Costa Rica has shown us, and that according to the numbers shows it's an intelligent decision. So I'll leave it here if you think. I want to thank you enormously for this space, this conversation, so open, so inspiring, and somehow futuristic. So I leave you and thank all of you who've been with us this afternoon. And I think this has been a conversation you must have enjoyed as much as I did. Thank you all very much and good afternoon. Thank you all. Thank you. Goodbye.